Hi everyone, I'm Fatehpuria, a senior at Grinnell College. Today I will be talking about a research project focusing on survey weighting which I conducted under Dr. Fellows. Our data were the responses of students at a liberal arts college to the ACHA's NCHA survey. Administrations usually conduct this survey using a convenience sample to understand students' health. Usually, responses from these surveys are not representative, as responders tend to be white and female, and so returns an inaccurate picture of their students' health. Weighting, then, is a widely used technique to make data more representative and compensate for potential bias. The aim of my project was first to identify and select which variables I would like to use to construct my weights, and second to test different weighting techniques and identify the technique that works best for our data. There are several demographic variables which affect an individual's propensity to respond. From the demographic information available to us both at the sample and population levels, we thought race, class year, and sex were important as they are commonly used weighting variables, and student athlete was interesting as student athletes are more likely to have healthier lifestyles because of regular exercise. Here we visualize the differences in representation with the inside colorful circle representing sample proportion and the outside gray circle representing the population proportion. Then we see here on the left that domestic white students and on the right that first year students were overrepresented in the sample as compared to the population, whereas students of other races and other class years were underrepresented. In these graphs, we have that female students and student athletes were overrepresented in our sample compared to the population. We also conducted chi-square tests to compare the difference in the sample and population proportions and found significant differences of p-value less than 0.001 for race, class year, and sex, and a significant difference of p-value less than 0.05 for the athlete. Because the representation of the athlete variable appeared to be the least different, we wanted to examine whether we could omit this variable to simplify our model. To do so, we generated weights with the combinations of race, athlete, year, and sex, or RACE, and of race, year, and sex, or RYS, using the ANISTRAKE package, which implements the American National Election Study weighting algorithm and uses an iterative procedure to generate multiplicative weights. The final weights are adjusted to align the survey marginals with the population for each weighting variable. After removing all our NAs, our final count was 808. The two graphs here show the proportion of observations for race and RYS colored by sex within different weight bins. We see that weights follow the expected pattern with more female observations than male in the lower weight bins and more male than female in the higher weight bins. So, both sets of weights would balance the data in the way we would expect it to. These graphs here help us make a decision about whether we can omit athlete. Since the proportional distribution of sex between the sample and population did have a very significant difference, we generated a third set of anisteric weights with race, athlete, and year, or RAY. We then compare the scatter plot of race and RYS colored by athlete, which is on the left, to that of race and ray colored by sex, which is on the right. On the left, we see there is no distinct distribution for the athlete variable, with blue and pink dots being relatively equally distributed among both the rays and RYS weights. On the right, though, we notice a distinct pattern with more female observations weighted less than 1 under the rays and distributed across all weights for ray. The difference in the distinctness of patterns between the two indicates that athlete may not be an important weighting variable. We decided then to go ahead with the RYS combination and wanted to compare the weights generated by raking using the anistrake and raking and post-stratification using the survey package. We wanted to explore whether anistrake and survey raking would produce different weights as they use slightly different algorithms. And to prepare the data, we removed all missing values and had a final count of 808. Here on the left, we have the scatter plot of survey raking and anistrake weights, and we see that they are the same weights just on a different scale. The only noteworthy difference between the two is that anisteric raking weights modify the subgroup totals only up to the sample size, whereas survey raking weights scale the subgroup totals to those in the population. Since survey raking and anisteric weights were essentially the same, we only compared anisteric to post-stratification weights. Post-stratification, unlike raking, is not an iterative procedure and examines the joint distribution. On the left is a scatter plot, and we see that most observations that have high anisteric weights also have high post-stratification weights. However, we have 2 points, red and blue, which have anisteric weights of above 1 but post-stratification weights of below 1. These points indicate groups in the sample that had high counts but had low counts in the population because of the difference in how the sample and population recorded some demographics. As post stratification is usually meant to be used on datasets for a large sample and population, we think that the cell counts in our sample and population for these two categories were simply too small to align, resulting in the discrepancy between the anisteric and post stratification weights. Overall, our findings agree with previous research that raking is the superior weighting technique for small sample sizes. It seems like raking minimizes the discrepancy between the individual's population data and corresponding sample data, whereas post stratification potentially exaggerates it. Also, we needed to have individual level population data to use post stratification, whereas in raking, we only needed population marginals. Though we had access to detailed data for our population, we realized that this may not always be the case. Further, since there's no real difference between the anisteric and survey raking weights except for scale, either set of weights works well for our sample. The next step going forward will be to compare weighted and unweighted analyses of the data to further understand the use of weights with this dataset, which can then be communicated with the college. This project provides an illustrative example of the weighting process, demonstrates how visualizations can provide meaningful insights, and contributes to the conversation with college administrations about proper utilization of survey data to get meaningful results. With weighting, colleges can generate representative data and use it to create data driven and more equitable health policies, taking into account the needs, behaviors, and attitudes of all their students rather than just a subsection of them.